Me and Doddy have recently been debating the difference between old school and mid school. Mid school being that sweet spot between retro and modern. I'm thinking late 2000s, early 2010s. But it got me thinking, has there really been enough change in the last decade, in the last 10 or so years, for us to classify that whole entire era with its own category? Well, I'm going to take you back in time and find out for myself. Whoa, what the heck am I wearing so much white for an off-road trail ride? Shimano DXs, pretty cool, but seriously heavy. And who stole my socks? Why are they so short? Backpack, camelback, of course, for all the sandwiches on my bike ride, and 2 litres of water. Obviously, 2 bottles isn't enough. Yeah, so 2010s. I think it was a time when in downhill, Greg Minnaar and G Atherton reigned supreme. Julian Absalon was on his winning streak in the cross-country World Cup. And when it come to bikes, there was cross-country, there was downhill. Enduro didn't really exist as a bike category. We had all mountain. And that was everything from trail to free ride, apparently. And this is one of those bikes. So this is my GT Aggressor circa 2010, maybe 2009. And you know what? The tech wasn't so bad back then. We've got disc brakes instead of V brakes. We've still got triple chain rings here, but this is a 3x9. Aluminium is reasonably lightweight. We've got some decent forks up the front here with the Marzocchi bombers. You know, things aren't that bad. But hey, let's dive into some deeper detail about the components and the geometry to see how things have really changed over the last decade. Yeah, that old bit of tack can stay in the 2010s for all I care, because we've got it so good right now. Even if we look at an aluminium hardtail for trail, things have really changed in the last 10 years. Geometry, components, suspension is amazing. Wheel sizes and widths have changed for the better, in my opinion. And I'm going to dive into each of those in more detail now to show you how it's really changed. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more content like this in the future. Now, mid-school bikes were all about those 26s and apparently coloured rims as well. But 29er was present in the 2010s, but they were more a kind of genre of their own for people who wanted to roll over roots and rocks, as if 26s weren't capable of doing that. But 2017 was when we started to see 29ers becoming more commonplace, even in the world of cross country. Now I've got 27.5 here, and this is considered a more playful size, I would say, but 29er is more common in your trail bikes these days. Also, I'm running 2.2 inches on the GT Aggressor over here, pretty commonplace back then. But I don't think a modern trail bike would start on anything less than 2.4 inches these days. I'm actually running 2.6s at the higher end of the tyre width. And as a result, our wheel rims have become much wider to accommodate more tyre widths as well. Back in the mid-century, we seemed to measure our suspension in inches rather than millimeters, which we do now. I've got a whopping 5 inches of travel on my Marzocchi bombers here, which was actually 130 mil-ish. Now 130 mil is pretty good for trail these days, so I wouldn't say suspension length has changed that much. However, it's not unsurprising to see 160 or even 170 on a trail bike these days, even if you're not doing super aggressive enduro downhilly riding. I would say that obviously technology has changed quite a bit in suspension. Damping technology has really progressed in the last 10 years, and it makes the old bombers, sorry to say, feel a little bit like pogo sticks, I've got to say. But just that small upgrade in technology, in the dampers, for example, of a set of forks from 10 years ago versus now, means that our riding style has completely changed. This bike feels more like a cross-country bike for bridleways nowadays compared to this bike, which is still an aluminium hardtail, but Blake has ridden this bike in the Mega Avalanche. I mean, that is downhill territory. So suspension has brought our riding along as well. So aggressor by name, aggressor by nature. Back in the day, this bike was considered an aggressive trail bike. It was considered a bit racy and it was described as long and roomy. Now, this is a medium bike and my Scout is a small. And yet that is a couple of mil longer in the chainstay, 29 millimeters longer in the top tube. The overall wheelbase is 108 mils longer than this medium trail bike from the 2010s. You know, we talk a lot about bikes getting longer, slacker and lower these days, and we moan, I guess, about the small changes. But when you look over the space of a decade, those are big changes. They have definitely got longer. And we've even got a 55 millimeter extra standover clearance. Look how much lower this top tube is to this. And for me, I hate to use the word game changer, but that really has been the game changer. Being able to step down easily with confidence, having a bike long enough and roomy enough to tackle technical terrain means that this has really brought on my riding, and I think our riding as a whole over the last decade. Now, I know I'm comparing two different brands here, but the GT Aggressor had a 71-degree head angle, which I would say is pretty commonplace for cross-country trail bike back in the day. And the Nuke-Proof Scout has a 65-degree head angle. A little aggressive, but not out of the ordinary. That's a 6-degree difference. I mean, I think 2010s me would look at this bike and think it was a downhill hardtail. But interestingly, the seat tube angle has actually got steeper. So this is 1 degree steeper on the Nuke-Proof Scout. And I think those angles in both the seat tube and the head tube angle is indicative of our style of riding and what we want to do in our trail riding these days. I think trail riding has fast become more of a winch and plummet style of riding, which means you need a steep seat angle to winch up those steep fire roads, and then you need a slack head angle so that you can tackle more aggressive, steeper technical descents, more so than what I was probably doing in the 2010s, which is probably a bit more like cross-country marathon these days. One of the biggest differences between the mid school and the new school, I think it's got to be the dropper post, has it not? I mean, sure, the dropper post was in development around about this time. The RockShox Reverb was dropped in 2010. It was one of the first hydraulic sealed units with a remote action, but they really weren't commonplace. Even if you'd bought a GT Force, which was the full suspension version of this trial bike, you still would have got a rigid post. And it was very commonplace to come to the top of a hill and manually drop your post before you did some gnarly descending. And gone are those days, thanks to the dropper post. You can now drop it mid-ride, barely without thinking about it. And I think people will hail this as one of those game changer components. And obviously gearing has massively changed. We've got a whopping 27 gears over here, thanks to 3 chain rings at the front and 9 cogs in the rear cassette. We have a whopping 44 teeth up the front here is our biggest one. And in the rear it's 32, so it's almost switched around, as I often rock a 32 on the front and I'll go up to even 52 in the rear on my cassette at the back. The big difference though, I would say, is although you had more gears back then, the range was actually a lot lower. And if you took away all of the crossover, so for example, you won't want to run your biggest chainring up front and your biggest cog at the back because that's too much stress on the chain. And once you start listing out the different gear ratios that you have between the combinations of 3 at the front and 9 at the back, there were so many crossovers and so many similarities that a 27 or a 21 speed would actually usably come down to about a 13 or a 12 speed. So these days we have it pretty good. We have similar gear ratio, a bigger range, on all of that without the front derailleur, which I've got to say, I am happy to leave in the past. Don't you just love front derailleurs? Why am I glad to leave this? Well, not only is it extra weight and extra maintenance, these things are a nightmare to adjust. And I swear you'd press a button and often nothing would happen. And then check out the lack of clutch in this rear derailleur. That chain would bounce around on a descent and pretty much change gear for you. And you know what? Don't even get me started on how many levers you have on your bars and how skinny those handlebars are as well. And why is that stem so long? So does this bike deserve its own category in the mid-school? Yeah, I think it does. It's not retro, but it's certainly not modern. And things really have changed a lot in 10 years. Now, Enduro wasn't technically a bike category back in the 2010s. It did sort of exist. Enduro racing was starting somewhere in Italy, but it wasn't until the mid 2010s that we were starting to see Enduro world racing and grassroots Enduro in our own countries. But it was Mountain of Hell and Mega Avalanche that was kicking off around about the 2010s that really started getting that endurance downhill category going. And I think our love for that and our excitement about this new genre is what really changed trail bikes. Trail and enduro started to blur a little bit, and development in suspension and things like dropper posts really changed the game for normal riders like us. And frankly, I'm grateful. I think modern day bikes are absolutely amazing, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I think this bike can stay in the mid-school, in the 2010s, where it belongs. But what do you guys think? Do you think a bike like this would still hold its ground now? Are you happy on your mid-school bike? Are you glad things have changed to this kind of modern Nuke-Proof Scout territory? Let us know down in the comments below. Let's start up that debate on mid-school versus new school.